All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well, and thank you for joining us today on our live event, talking about our AI in networking report. Let me introduce myself. I'm Roy Chua. I'm principal here at AvidThink, a research advisory firm covering infrastructure technologies, and I'm very pleased to have with me Archana Khetan, who is our contributing analyst on our AI and networking report. Archana, you want to say a few words about yourself? Introduce yourself.
No, absolutely, Roy. So my name is Archana Khetan. I have been in internet networking industry for almost 3 decades now, and in product management roles for last 25 years. And it's a small world. I think many of us know each other. And I think, Roy, you and I have known each other since for over a decade now, since your early days in
For over a
SPX.
decade. Yes, absolutely.
So looking
Yes.
forward to this talk today.
Yeah, excellent. So yeah, so we're going to talk about the report that we just put out, AI in networking, and here we go. So I think the question, maybe it's not a question so much, is that why we are deciding to do a report on AI and networking right now. And I think for many of us, AI is a pretty hot topic, and that resurgence came with the arrival of ChatGPT, generative AI, and all the wonderful things that we've seen so far. And so there's this whole thing about AI and AI and AI, right? It's everywhere. And again, I think the key realization, especially in networking, is that we've had AI for some time now, and we wanted to make sure that when we did this AI networking report, which there was clearly demand for in the market, we didn't want to forget and the fact that we have predictive AI, and that's been around for some time. So Archana, any thoughts about as you approached this report, what were your thoughts, what were your goals, what were you aiming to do?
Yeah, no, I think, Roy, as you frame it, Gen AI has taken everyone's imagination by storm ever since we all started to use it in the consumer context again. Yet another repetition in the history right now. And I think I have taken a little bit more of a product management approach to the research report, I would say, which is thinking through in terms of what are all the problems currently in the industry that AI can solve. And AI here meaning a combination of predictive and generative AI. And I think there's an opportunity. Every company, every vendor, every CSP, every channel partner, every enterprise organization, I think everyone is currently struggling with how do I get a Gen AI project off the ground and how do I show ROI and how do I get broader consensus within my organization to move these projects around as well. So
Yeah,
at least
for
my
sure.
vision for
And
this report was to have the people have a baseline of everything they could use as a foundational learning point to move forward on the project. So at least the goal has been broad and then foundational for the broader set of users and networking industry.
excellent. And I think, in terms of the report table of contents, I think, we're flashing it up here. It is a long report, and there's about 20 pages on it. And I think we could have written a longer report for sure. There's a lot of content in here. But I think what I would say is that, Archana has done a great job in consolidating a very broad view. I think, in my opinion, I think this is one of the broadest views of AI and networking. We cover across all domains, right? So whether you're a data center or your enterprise networks, campus networks, wide area networks, all the way to, the transport and the RAN as well. So I think, in terms of scope is quite wide. And likewise, I think, we did the same thing with lifecycle, and you'll see in the lifecycle, from design all the way into deployment to management, optimization, and so on, that we cover that as well. And again, right, there's a lot to cover, but I think, Archana did a great job in terms of the content here. And then, I think this is an interesting, what do you call that, report, in that yeah, we named the report an interesting name. We called it, sort of pipe dreams and AI realities, and sort of networking's midlife crisis, if you will. And maybe a couple of words around that. People have asked us about this title. Some people really like it. I saw on LinkedIn we had comments actually on the title of the report itself. So Archana, thoughts around this title that we ended up with?
Yeah, no, I think midlife crisis is a very apt naming for where the networking industry is today. Networking as we know it, and many of us who started in networking, um, much of the innovation happened in the 90s. This was a time of internet, and it was also the time of client server computing. And it's been 30 years, right? 30 years for that network. And if you look in terms of changes to the networking in general, yeah, with cloud, we saw some change with, and which was all brought in by software defined networking. But networking not really has had a major moment like compute and storage had, to that same level. And if you look at the networks of today, they are far more complex than they used to be. And if you look at the expectations on the network of today, it's also far more reaching. And the most important difference is the need for agility and the need for full stack observability, amongst all of the other things I think everybody is familiar with. So I think networks have to be rethought, and even people in the networking domain have to re-envision their jobs. So I think the midlife crisis, in my mind, is a very apt name that was selected for the report finally.
Yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
think that you have, Roy, of pipe dreams with the, we are all into the
Yeah.
business of selling pipe or connectivity eventually. And what dreams, can AI make real, right? But I'll let you give your thoughts as well.
Yeah, no, I thought that was again, I'm and I think those of us in networking will get the little mention around pipe dreams, right? It's got two meanings, right? And networks are pipes. So I thought that was pretty apt, and it's amazing. So that title itself. Let me actually jump over to some of the rejected titles before I come back to this. So the couple of rejected titles that you'll see here, and I know we posted a couple on LinkedIn. And where did we get these titles from? Well, the way it happened was, Archana and I were talking right before report publication, and we were like, and she was like, Roy, I think your title is too boring. And I'm like, yeah, I guess it is, because originally it was like something about AI ops and and tapping into the value of AI ops, and so we asked Claude, Anthropic Claude, and said, can you punch the title up a little bit, make it more compelling, more interesting, and it came up with a bunch of those, and we did the same thing with ChatGPT. And obviously, it came up with some titles that we rejected, right? Dumb pipe, smart AI, AI ate my network strategy. So clearly quite creative. I would have to say I was very impressed. And so the current title was actually the one that has, the pipe dreams and AI realities. Networking's midlife crisis was actually a tweak on one of the suggestions from AI. So this is one of those meta moments where the title of the AI networking report was in fact suggested and assisted by AI, co-pilot, so to speak. So I thought that was pretty apt. But yeah, I think I would say a lot of us in AI in networking, we've seen that network automation hasn't quite realized the dream yet, right? We're definitely not quite at the autonomous network level. I mean, it's been a challenge to get here, but I think where we are right now, sort of 30, 40 years since the original commercial, introduction of networking and enterprise and the internet, I think we have a chance. And with AI and with Gen AI, I think it's sort of the closest we've come to achieving some of those interesting goals, like things like intent-based networking we've talked about for many, many years. And I think I've had conversations with many friends in industry that this might be the moment where generative AI can actually help understand intent or reason about intent better than we've had in the past. So I think that we're at a very, very interesting moment. So let's start and sort of talk about some of the elements in the report. And again, strongly encourage you to go ahead and download the report. You can download the report. It's free. We don't charge for the report. Thanks to the sponsors who make this all happen. And likewise, you can go to the site. There's plenty of videos as well. So, and we put a link there. You can go there and download the report anytime. But let's move on to talk about some of the elements in there. And one of the key things I think here is generative, predictive AI. And Archana, so I know, as you did a research and talked to different vendors and different users and all that, this is one of the themes that came up, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, predictive AI, as we all know, has been in the industry for a very long time. AI is not new to networking. Every vendor has an AI ops plan, and a lot of that is today, relying on all the goodness that predictive AI has given us. And in the industry, of course, if you do any reading up on the existing content, it's always about the left brain and the right brain, how the two augment each other and really work together. But I think the way to look at this would be generative AI makes the capabilities and dreams of what is possible in the networking domain with respect to full automation and autonomy possible. It's like, if I have the content, how do I put that content to use? I mean, I think that's the best way for me to think about how Gen AI can come into both business value proposition and ROI calculations and so forth, right? And again, generative AI has got reasoning beyond what you just network domain centric reasoning. Generative AI has the ability to generate content and summarize and all that. So I think if anyone who's looking at the two together, you really have the perfect recipe for the dream of, in the end, executing a network which is as autonomous as possible. And I feel like this is the other half of the equation that was missing when people were talking about autonomous network over the last, 10 years or so, which has now come. Roy, happy for you to add any other comments you might be.
Agreed. I think you're absolutely right in terms of, we've had predictive AI for some time. I think, you go back to very, very early, so 2000, even late 2000s, early 2010s. We talked about, self-organizing networks, SON, and we talked about, self-healing networks and all those elements in there. And a lot of those was around predictive AI and all the models that they had, fundamentally in predictive AI. Historically, it was more the RNNs, recurrent neural networks, right, or LSTM, long short-term memory, and trying to use that to sort of predict what network capacity or anomalies in time series data, as you will see. And I think that's been the state of the art for some time now. We've been using that quite effectively, actually, remarkably. We don't talk about it in a very, very big way, but it's always been there. And I think, Archana, you're absolutely right. Generative AI is very interesting. Again, it's not perfect. It's still early, still maturing. We're still learning about it. Maybe the transformer model is it. Maybe the transformer model is not it. Who knows? But fundamentally, we are seeing early success. And I think, we wouldn't be here talking about it if there was no early success and early, very promising indications that the value that generative AI can bring to networking is potentially quite substantial. And Archana was right on in terms of, the hybrid, taking both approaches into networking, I think, is that maybe not the holy grail, but close to it, right? That's, as we go forward, certainly takes us forward in a very big way. I think that's definitely very, very promising. So let's look at some of the use cases. I mean, we always start in the networking with use case, right? What problem are you trying to solve? Right? What does it solve? And so maybe Archana, you want to take us through some of the use case mapping here with AI?
Absolutely. And I would say, I think this is the most important part of the report, because again, the use cases here are really driven by the view of what is possible. So on the use case mapping, there are two approaches in the research paper. One is a use case mapping based upon the underlying technology or technologies that will be used. And so there is some classification around, discovery, generation, automation, and simulation. And then we have also taken an approach of use case mapping by just the networking lifecycle. So if I look at the use case mapping in terms of what is most exciting and what is most near term, is really the concept of an intelligent virtual agent. And I think every company is either already in the works of doing it, or if they are not, then you are definitely behind. You should be on board with it. And the implementation is quite simple. You have a lot of public facing content. And even some internal content which could be public facing, and you put all of that into your RAG engine. You can do techniques like anonymization and other things if you have some sensitive data. But his idea here is, and a lot of this approach, it's also good because it's a co-pilot approach, right? A lot of the discovery, the virtual agent options, meaning you're not having AI do anything automatically. You're actually having AI generate answers. They make your finding a discovery of the information you're looking for a lot more easy. And people have also used it in the context of a Google search versus a AI search engine, how different a response and customize a response you can get. So I think this is something I'm really excited about. Again, my lens is very much coming from a product angle. And one of my key, problems in the product angle is how do I reduce friction, both in terms of customer experience for using the product, but also even selecting the product. And I think the discovery processes that are enabled by AI can be of immense help. I need to figure out what SKUs to order. You make your portfolio available, and outcomes pops up the SKU recommendation. It's as simple as that. How do I do a config generation? And it's going to give you a template that you can then take a look very quickly and decide whether it works for you, make some minor tweaks. But it really simplifies looking for that information, and even presenting it in a very customized manner for you. Then you have a choice to use or not use. Roy, anything you want to add? I mean, there are a lot of other things we could dwell on, but I know we'll run short of time.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to talk about, and again, we encourage people to take a look actually at the report itself, but we go into more detail on these things. But I think it's important to note that AI is not just in the operations, right? I mean, we hear about sort of AI used in the operations. It starts even as Archana says, product discovery, right? I mean, picking the right products. I guess you could use AI to pick the right vendors too. I mean, so there's nothing stopping you from doing that, right? So, and all the way through all the different applications and use cases, and I think in this case, I think AI, both generative AI and in some cases predictive AI or hybrids, there is a product market fit, as Archana says. She always looks at it from the product manager point of view, which is a good blend, right? It blends both the business side of the equation and the technology side of the equation. I think that's always at least the reports that we write usually take a PM view on that, and that usually maps nicely in terms of the intersection between business needs and technology capabilities. And that's been of value, at least to the readers that download the reports and the people who give us feedback on that. So that's always a good thing. But yeah, no, I think at this point in time we can talk about sort of the other element of the report, which is sort of AI across the networking lifecycle, right, all the way from design all the way, and it doesn't stop when you're operating, or troubleshooting or optimizing. Right. I mean, there's also innovation and improvement as well. And AI definitely has value across all those. So I'll let Archana talk about, her perspective and what you learned in the research on this.
Yeah, just one caveat, and I think it should be intuitive to everyone by now, is that this report is really focusing on AI in terms of the deployment lifecycle. There are parts of AI that can come into other elements of customer experience which are not tied to the product. We are not covering that. And of course, there's also the part of what can networking do with AI, like all the stuff that's happening in the data center side. We're not covering that in this report. But this is really about AI in the networking portfolio and product. And again, because the attempt is to take a holistic swap, many of the ideas here in the report, some of them you may find are available, and we have actually mapped each one to maturity based upon the earlier slide on underlying technologies and what the customer value prop can be. That if you're trying to figure out a ROI or some decision making on where you want to prioritize, you can do that. But again, I think here I like conflict because it brings out the better part of the discussion. And because so much of AI across networking lifecycle is focused on day 2 and AI ops and so forth, I'm going to focus a little bit today on day 0 and day 1. And that is simply because it's new. And I think there's a lot of potential and possibility. Of course, one could make a decision to say my day 2 is where my biggest ROI is because it's a day-to-day task, versus day 0 and day 1, which is a one-time task for many, unless you're a service provider. But I think day 0, day 1 is interesting on a few different fronts as well. And I think this is something I would love for more options in the market which are focused on it. One is, as we know, during the COVID timeframe, there was a lot of buildup of inventory. And one of the things I've been hearing for the last 9-12 months is we don't have enough experience or expertise of people deploying that because there's stockpile of inventory sitting in different parts of the channel organizations. So if there's a concern with skill set gaps to design and configure the environment, then AI can actually help quite a bit. Of course, this is one of the most challenging parts of AI to solve. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but we should, at least we should not just think about role of AI in day 2 roles, but also what can be done in day 0, day 1. And the other element, which is very common that I see, and I've seen it in my own career multiple times, is the translation from product A to product B within a single vendor environment or vendor A to vendor B. And a lot of times, I think one big hindrance for technology adoption is the fact that incumbency builds a very big moat in terms of what operationally one finds feasible to deploy or not deploy, because it can be quite expensive. So to the extent AI can solve that problem, which is config generations and not, but also config translations and automation of policy creation, I think these are really very big untapped opportunities in the market, especially for companies who are new, who want to do something different. But then the struggle is going to be, how do I transition existing environments to the new world? So I think that's a very big unmet opportunity in my mind. Roy, your pick on
Agreed.
this thing, what excites you in this list?
Yeah, agreed. I think what you talked about is I mean, day zero, day one is definitely new. And historically, in fact, I had when we were contemplating doing this report and talking to a bunch of people as well on this, is some of people like, well, Roy, if you put the word AI ops in there, then it's going to be just management and optimization, right, and troubleshooting. And I'm like, no, I think AI ops as used in the IT construct historically has been about that. And networking, network AI ops or AI net ops or whatever you're going to call that has been focused on that. But I think the reality is that because of the capabilities of AI, especially now with the arrival of Gen AI, right? I don't think we need to make a new term called Gen AI ops. I think that's just confusing everyone, or Gen AI net ops or net Gen AI ops, right? I think that's just a waste of time. But not that some marketing people won't try it. I'm sure they will. But I think the scope enlarges. I think at this point, the debate I had with some of the thought leaders in industries, I think AI ops needs to expand to the full life cycle, and it needs to cover the day zero, day one, as well as Archana talked about, and some of the ideas that we heard out there, and like Archana said, was pretty excited by, because fundamentally it ties back to some of the intent stuff as well. It's to the extent that Gen AI can provide an abstraction or normalization in terms of different configuration. Whether one vendor's config versus another vendor's config versus a third vendor's config, that barrier sort of goes away because it's a translation layer, right? It's kind of like Gen AI helps you with translation across sort of human languages. Right now, you can seamlessly go between, say, English and Spanish or English and Chinese, especially some of the more popular languages, right? And Gen AI is really good at that, and it's pretty amazing, right? Some of the stuff that we had with NLP and machine translation for many years, Gen AI has just come along and sort of accelerated it, expanded it. And the same thing as Archana talked about, you think about sort of day zero, day one situation. Is if you could take intent into any vendor's config, mostly accurately, how does that change the way you should be thinking about operating your network, about vendor selection, about multi-vendor selection, right? I think some of those things definitely are going to be impacted, and I think that's what's really exciting about the adoption of AI in networking.
Yeah,
So I
but
think that's yeah.
yeah, I had one other
Go ahead.
thought I do want to share here, because I think that will be exciting too. Is we talked earlier about midlife crisis, where networks are becoming more complex, but there's a need for them to be more simple while delivering on all the expectations and functionality. And I think one other opportunity in the product domain is, how can AI make networks, especially the user experience, simple? And if you look historically, it was all about, every vendor is about feature functionality. And right now, I do think there is a trade-off in the industry regarding functionality versus simplicity. Um, Many of the options in the industry which claim to be simple, I do think are simple because the product is simple.
Mhm.
And of course, there are always going to be areas, and somebody may say we don't agree. But for the most part, if you look at functionality under the hood, the functionality is simple. It's just tied it into a very beautiful user experience, and that's what makes the product shine. That's what makes people love. And the opportunity within AI now is that, can you take all of the complexity which is required, because you want to have internal complexity, right? Because you need to have all of those feature and functionality. You want to have all the nerd knobs to customize for your environment, but whilst doing it still while giving a very simple user experience. And I do think this is very, very powerful, that end users will no longer have to trade complexity or simplicity over functionality, and AI can help bring both of that together. So I think that's another opportunity for vendors who are struggling with the complexity problem right now.
Agreed. I think, AI, generative AI in particular, can help translate or provide a different user experience from what we've had before. And I like you could, I mean, we've talked about, that you just talk to your network. I would like, a connection from, point A to
Yes.
point B with the following SLA, and, make it optimized for video, right? And that magically happens. And I think, maybe we're getting close to that, right? And I think, sort of generative dashboards, or Gen AI co-pilot assisted dashboards, they're definitely here. I've seen a lot of demos, especially in research for this report. We've seen a lot of demos, but I think the next generation is coming. It's really, really interesting. And so speaking of coming, and when is it coming, and timing and all that, um, again, this is a eyeful because it's small, but again, I point you to the report. Go ahead, download the report, because that's where you actually see the level of detail that you need to. But what we've done here is we've tried to map. And we did talk about what we were seeing in terms of maturity of the different use cases, and so we've tried to do a mapping of generative AI, predictive AI, hybrid, right, across all the different elements in the life cycle and the use cases. And then we've taken our best shot at trying to predict when sort of the early majority adoption of these things are. Some of these things are pretty straightforward. I would say sort of like, RF site survey, right? We see that sort of RF management with predictive AI happening already in the RAN, and even in Wi-Fi, sort of radio resource management and some of those elements. Predictive AI has added value, is adding value, and that's been value add to date. But there are some other areas that are a little bit sort of further out there, and we'll see those come, I think, over time as well. And any thoughts, Archana, on this slide? I know you talk a lot in the report already, so we always ask people to go take a look at it. But any highlights in your mind?
Yeah, no, this slide was essentially an effort to try to map the current landscape. I mean, again, I'm a very framework-driven person, so this was really an attempt to put my view of the where the industry is at this time. Kind of trying to sequentialize it, use the technology and the time frame. And my ask of the audience really is, welcome, to look at it, leverage it as you see. If you disagree, please do send us a note, because I think, again, the landscape is evolving very rapidly. And for me, I'm just, looking forward to making sure we can continue to make progress in terms of the vision of a simple network, more automation, and, giving really the operators the full insight of what is needed. So I again, recommend looking at the report, share your own experiences, either on LinkedIn or private chat, and would love to continue this dialogue.
I'm sure Ashna would love to hear from you. If you have opinions on this, and they may be the same, it may be different opinions, or maybe we've missed something here, right? Certainly, yeah, you're welcome to send that. And again, it's not all smooth sailing, right? Again, I think fundamentally, we expect there to be barriers to adoption of AI, and there's multiple elements in there, and you'll see these sort of listed in the report, ranging from, do people trust it, right? And starting with the co-pilot use cases Ashna talked about, I think that's certainly a sort of a safe way, human in the loop type assistive approaches to that. And over time, when you demonstrate that it's got sufficient value, then you let it actually make changes potentially on its own. But there are other barriers as well, right? Do the workflows that we have today, right? We have some of those workflows, especially in Gen AI, that are sort of retrieval augmentation, right? So does that scale? Does that work? Does that work in production? Can you explain what's going on, right? If you're trying to make a recommendation around, go change your configuration, why, right? And they're like, no, just do it, right? So I think the explainability is important, and I know some of the networking vendors are trying to build systems that provide you explanation, or at least source data and reasoning why, so that you can understand what's going on. I think that's a good thing. And then there are other elements in there. Again, the fact that networks have multiple domains, and can you actually deal with it across all the domains simultaneously with a single engine, single model. There's human friction, there's resistance to the AI coming in, and some of the vendors are trying to figure out how best to present it so that it gets adopted and not rejected by the people who could benefit from it. So we're seeing some element of that. And then today, I would say there is a question, especially around Gen AI, about the ROI, right? We're throwing, 500 billion in, or 600 billion in, or whatever it is. What's the return? What's the time frame for the return? But I would say, look, I mean, predictive AI has really generated value for networking. Generative AI, the early use cases, some of those examples that we talk about and we show in the report are also showing very promising results in and of it themselves today. And so I think, the one thing we want to be clear on is that there is a way to get value from AI today. And I think to do that in partnership with the vendors that you have, I think there is definitely value in doing that. Any other thoughts here, Archana?
No, I think this is a good summary of the capture. The For companies who are still kind of testing their toes into AI, I feel like they are struggling with trust in technology, unclear ROI. I think probably those two I see are the biggest ones, and maybe some data privacy concern. A lot of it is coming from domains outside of typical networking, from legal and compliance and other things. And companies who are further ahead in AI, they are now heading into the actual complications like RAG implementations, workflows. And those who are even advanced, now they're thinking about how do I solve the problem end to end. So I do
Yeah.
think these different barriers are also, if one were to take an insight into which barrier they are, it also gives you a view on what stage of maturity from an AI adoption you are, I do think. And again, like any other technology, it's going to be a mixed bag. But somebody has to make a call to say, by not doing AI, am I falling behind or am I ahead? And then how is AI helping in my exact context? Like there's a question on the chat on ROI. I do think there's a reason I didn't put ROI commentary on the paper, because I do think that is going to vary depending upon the audience and where your pain points are. Day zero, day one, day two, I think all of these are relevant. Like if you are a new vendor who is into the world of trying to drive adoption, I do think investing in more day zero, day one is going to help you quite a bit. But if you are an incumbent, and your day zero, day one may help you only in just simplicity of user experience, but you may be more vested to give better user experience to your existing deployments. Again, telco versus non-telco is very different. Channel, in the channel, are you a managed service provider where day two becomes more important, or are you kind of doing more integration? So it's really going to vary. It's a very audience centric, which was the reason why we didn't put it in the research report. But I would say the other element is, like, I would ask a question to the broader audience: how do you put an ROI on simplicity? Think through that problem and then decide, are you trying to create a business case justification or a business value justification? And then at least approach from that perspective as well, because it's going to be a lot of education internally and learning internally as well on how do you rightly leverage within your budgets the AI wave for your environment.
Agreed. I think that ROI calculation,
Mhm.
that's based on the use cases that you care about, and where you are in that sort of networking ecosystem, and where you are in terms of the deployment maturity and the problem sets that you have. But fundamentally, hopefully the report, go ahead and download it, or even take a look at some of the video. The videos have their own perspectives on it, and everyone has a slightly different perspective. Again, it's a wide topic. There's many domains of networking, as we well know, and it is different, right? Carriers, enterprises, MSPs, vendors, all of it. That angle that you have is different, but hopefully the report has enough sort of context and sort of ground. I would say sort of foundational elements that help you make the decision, at least pointing in the right direction, right? I think that's the hope. And again, we really encourage you to go ahead and download the report, right? And that, I think, hopefully will help you. It's free, right? I mean, again, it's there's no cost. Your R should be infinite, because your I in this case is just maybe a couple, or near infinite, a couple of minutes of your time just to go and download the report, and it's available here. So I think before we go to Q&A, go ahead and type your questions in there, and we'll address those as best we can. Maybe Archana. So number one, I'm really, really glad that had you to help with this report. I mean, of all the people out there, in terms of the experiences, you have a big range of experiences networking, and not just networking, but some of the applications of networking beyond that. And so, really glad to have had you, help with this report, and that's a huge, huge help. And I think it's been very, very well received. So a couple of, I would say, maybe one question for you is just, what surprised you when you did this work, and I know you talked to a bunch of people for this, and what are you looking forward to in terms of what you've learned around AI and networking?
Yeah, I would say I'm generally a person who comes with a healthy skepticism. I am not somebody who goes with to every bubble and wave to say, yeah, I'm all behind it. And we were all using AI in our personal context, and until I really dwell deeper into the report, the research, the conversations, this is one area where I am even more optimistic about it than when I went in. And again, as I said, I'm a very cautiously this thing. So I think it tells it. Hopefully, the audience gets a view regarding the level of optimism I have. And again, optimism is again I have to emphasize it is driven by what people dream of, right? It's almost like it can make your dreams into reality, but to turn dreams into reality, you have to understand all the stuff. I mean, it's like a black box, right? Nobody knows what's coming out
Yeah,
of it.
yeah,
So, of course, human co-pilot kind of approaches will be prominent in the early term, but that itself can give you a very, very big improvements in whatever problem domain you are trying to address until you reach a maturity curve when you can trust it to automate. But I would say to me the surprising part was my typical self would be I'm starting here and I'm going to find issues and I'm going to go here, and here it was like I'm starting here and it has gone up even higher.
yeah.
So that was my
I,
surprise.
I think that's good. I mean, that's good. I know. I mean, you've been in the industry for some time now. You have a lot of experience in networking. You are CCIE. So you know networking deeply into to the I would say to the extent that you actually became more positive over that. I think should lead everyone that's listening here to actually check it out because it's clearly has value and it has had value, will have even more value. So I think that's the expectation on my side. I think with AI, Gen AI specifically, I think there's still a lot that we don't understand. I think if you ask the expert, they don't understand why the foundation models do what they do, and the behavior is emergent behavior is unclear, right? And so, but I think for me, I've been involved with this intent-based networking stuff for a while now, since even before the early days of SDN, right? So I think generative AI is probably the biggest shot in the arm to the intent-based networking sort of, and I think that could help bring autonomous networking the milestone to reaching that forward dramatically, right? I think that would be my take on it, which is that I think it's pretty exciting, and I'm just waiting to see what happens across the whole networking lifecycle in terms of the adoption of AI. So I'm already seeing a lot of cool things from the vendors, and I expect to see a lot more from the vendors and the researchers on that. So with that, let me wrap up this section, right? Let's wrap up this section on the sort of presentation and go to some of the questions here. Let me see. I see. How do we do this? Again, apologies, this is our sort of first time I'm doing. I've been on people's LinkedIn Live. I haven't run a LinkedIn Live myself. We're going to go through the questions here and see if we can pull up some of these here. Let's address this one. There's one here. We'll go sort of backwards, which is, what are some of the challenges that you face while bringing AI solutions to your organization? How do you address the skepticism from different units and decision makers? I would say, I think, Archana, you want to take this first, or you want me to take this first? I think this is sort of guidance for people who are trying to adopt AI in the organizations, right? How do we
I can
overcome skepticism? Yeah.
Yeah, I can take the vendor view, and maybe we can add to it from other organizations. I think the skepticism. I mean, again, given the potential and the risk, I think every organization should rightfully drive with skepticism. But the question really becomes: one is about education, and again, this is where I have to emphasize the whole purpose of the research paper was, again, I focus on the art of possible as a theme in the research paper, at least in my, as I think back as to why I wrote it. It was about, as a product leader, everything I could do. And if you're an organization, everything you could do. So some of it is about vision. What vision can you, fully accomplish? And vision to me was about complete autonomy, right? Which we know is a pipe dream, that I know, because there will be some human intervention required, but it is good to challenge yourself into a much forward looking thinking and have it come back. So one is like sell a vision to your organization about what AI can accomplish for you. And then, of course, also address what risks could have been there, but how you are preventing it. Because again, there are many safe ways of implementing AI in the organization. So I think that education of what does safe implementation look like is important. And again, to the extent you're using a co-pilot approach and not leaving things to AI, the risk I think can be fairly limited. Is again all about education. And then I think the biggest challenge I see is still companies waiting for an ROI decision versus pulling in to say, this is something which is going to be core to me, that I don't need to necessarily spend a lot of time. I mean, of course, if I have a dollars to spend, I will always push people on, show me the value. But sometimes business value is not quantifiable. And you have to find the right balance of what is the approach you take to show that business value within the organization. And I think that everybody's struggling with. The telcos are, the vendors are, and everybody. With the limited budget you have, what do you take away and what do you go forward with?
Agree. I think agree. I think the key thing here is, how do you build trust? Start with small problem domains. And I think, as Archana said, human in the loop makes it a lot more palatable and reduces the risk from the AI doing the wrong thing. And then as you prove the value, then you expand it. And I've seen the same thing across other large organizations as well. Like, like when BT, for instance, adopted the code assistant, they did it with a small team first, and they checked stats on how often the humans were actually adopting the recommendations. And again, here's recommendations from the co-pilot. And when they saw the adoption rate was very high, then they started rolling out across the board. I think that trust building is important. All right, next question here, which is in what areas or use cases do we see LLM-based agentic workflows driving the next level automation and networking? Archana, you want to start? I can start.
Yeah, we should pull up that slide on the table. Maybe it'll be easier for the other people in the audience. So this is something, I'm very gung-ho about. I think everybody in the industry is very gung-ho about that agentic-based workflows are really the future. Two slides back, the one which had the,
hang on.
yeah, one more,
okay, yep, I got it back.
So if you look at a lot of the automation-centric activity, right, where you have to stream together a bunch of individual tasks into a workflow that could essentially automate a subset of either a query or subset of individual asks. Yeah, agentic workflow is going to be really, really important. And again, this is one other area. It's about the art of possible, right? What are all the things you want to string together to address the problem situation you have, right? Are you doing a root cause analysis, and then after root cause analysis, are you planning to send an automated query, a report back to whoever? I mean, it's everything is going to be agentic workflow based. So I think to me, it's a very center and core towards moving to the next phase of leveraging predictive and Gen AI together. Once all of the low-hanging discovery-based stuff is already addressed, and I think organizations are already looking into it, and but we have not seen, at least maybe Roy, if you have seen, what the visibility is, with anybody who might be at a leader level. But this is going to be very important.
I think so. I think, I think to this question, agree. What I'm seeing around agentic workflows so far is fundamentally sort of the AI ops, the closed loop deployment and closed loop remediation. And so what happens is, you have an issue, and then you launch multiple agents, one to figure out the root cause, and then one to actually trial the solution. And you may actually spawn an agent to try it out on the digital twin first, simulate it, and then when that actually works out well, then they take the next step. But right now, the agentic workflow is usually gated by human gates, where each step of the way the recommendations are shown, the results are shown, and then the human sort of ungates each step, right? And I think in the longer term, these things will be allowed to run automatically with another supervisory agent on top that's seeing what happens and doing the close loop monitoring to make sure that none of the steps have been taken by each of the domain specific agents or task specific agents have gone off the rails, right? So I think that is what we're seeing. I'm seeing early versions of that, so that's definitely in progress. Moving on to the next question here, which is, have you seen any applications on document summarization and config generation within the vendors? And the comment here is the few that I've seen are not very good. In fact, going straight to ChatGPT does a better job. thoughts, Archana? And I've seen some, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I have not. I'm not a tester per se. I'm a visionary. You have probably played with more vendor products than I have. So
I have,
I'll
yeah,
refer this
I
to
have.
you in terms of what you are seeing, which is working well, if any.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, yeah. And as Nachna says, for me, at least, the work that I do, I tend to play around with a lot of vendor products, a lot of things, just to get hands on to see what the state of the art is, and that helps. That helps, at least for me, understand where it's actually going and what the state of the possible is, and also helps me deal with the vendor over marketing, supposed to, as opposed to what's real and what's not. I think, to the question, I have seen applications in document summarization. A lot of it has to do with sort of config summarization, log summarization, event summarization to try to tell a story, and in terms of what's going on with the network, as well as config generation. It's still early yet, and I would say the answer is early. I have seen, in fact, I've used it to generate configurations and the like. It's not all the way perfect yet, but I would say that this is one of the areas I expect to rapidly evolve. And the reason why is when you have something that's akin to code generation. One of the advantages of code generation is you can actually validate the code. You can actually test the code, run the code, compile the code for correctness. And similarly with config generation, my expectation is that you'll see that evolve very quickly and get pretty good very quickly, because the vendor knows how to validate the config, or at least good vendors know how to validate the config and test it and run it even in the digital twin situation. And so my expectation is config generation will improve dramatically within the next 12 months. So that's one area that I expect, to be quite strong. In terms of summarization of the outcomes, summarization of the events, I'm seeing quite impressive results. It doesn't always quite get it, but I think, again, it's still early. I'm seeing a lot of pilots, but I would say production quality or near production quality this area will likely happen in the next 12 months. So that's my expectation, because of the ability of validation, and because of large amount of data around config and around summarization. So I think that's that. And then let's move up to one
Well,
more
just from the
question.
idea
Yeah,
of
go ahead.
AI generating a config and AI validating the config, and you could probably have multiple LLMs working in the background to
Yeah,
test each other. So again, this is
sure.
one of those things where your vision and the approach you use is going to determine the outcome a lot. So again, we hope people on the engineering domains, they're thinking through some based on these questions, right? Like how do you create a more foolproof situation? That wonderful example, Roy. So thank you.
Yeah. No, this is what's happening out there, right? And a lot of vendors are focusing on this across both carriers and enterprise. I've seen examples, I've tried examples, so I know this is sort of where it is. And then I think the last question here before we wrap, again, thank you, audience, for staying with us. The question is, can you discuss ROI for day 0, day 1, day 2 automations? How do you prioritize? I know Archana's already touched a little bit on that. Archana, you want to say more on that? No, I can also jump in. Feel free.
Yeah, no, I think again, as I said, ROI part, I if I were driving it, I would look at business value creation, um, which is going to be hard within the construct of an ROI, because you. So one of the things about AI, which is you often read also in the press and text, is don't just look at incremental work. Sometimes you may want to re-envision everything, re-envision the workflow, re-envision how you plan anything. So that could be another approach one could take, in terms of, rather than looking at incrementally, which is where typically ROI based stuff comes, but can you actually re-envision? So I think it's a very complex topic. I don't have much to add beyond what I already shared, which is look into your individual environment, look into your pain points, and then how do you take that internally within your organization. And I'm in this case, I'm a big believer in quant and qual. So some quantitative data, but combined with some qualitative assessment, because again, we are kind of really going out of the traditional way in which we have done new projects here. This is really about infusing capabilities internally, which is going to grow and give you even more ROI over time. Actually, I remember there was a conversation I had heard long time back, but probably a decade ago, where somebody said, like, if I put $1 of investment, I don't just look at how that is giving me return, but also how is it going to scale me in future. And I think that part about AI is very important, that it's not just if I'm what do you build on top of it and top of it and top of it, because it's going to be a journey. pretty much for everyone as the landscape evolves. Roy, I'll defer to your thoughts. I know I've spoken enough on this. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you just said. And again, I think, ROI is a difficult thing. It's basically in what time frame, and to the extent that the organization builds long-term foundation capabilities, absorptive capabilities around AI, I think, that's part of the equation as well, right? And so sometimes, quantifying that return is a little tricky, but also to make sure that there is value in having the organization becoming more expert in AI and actually using it, because I don't think AI is going to go away. I mean, I think, there is no AI going away. I think the reality is it's here, it's been here, it will be here. And I think the question is, what can it do for you, and how can you ease your organization and take advantage of it and adopt it, and do it in a very, I would say, sort of a measured fashion, and do it in an informed fashion, right? Which is part of why we put the report out there. Hopefully it's helpful to you. And so with that, we thank you for your time. We appreciate you spending almost the last hour here with us. We hope you find it helpful, and more importantly, hopefully, the report, you download it. And again, it's free. If you have feedback for us, go ahead, send us feedback. We always welcome your feedback, as Archana says. That's how we improve. And again, thank you all, and thank you, Archana, for spending the time with me this morning. Really appreciate it.
No, most welcome, Roy. This has been a really pleasant collaboration together. And again, I think AvidThink, I was very impressed with the quality of research reports coming out from you guys. It's not shallow. It's like it's got fair amount of depth. So at least I thought this would be a right venue to have a broad sweep, but just partner with you on the depth. So it's been a good
thank you. Thank you. It has been. I really appreciate it. Really, really thank you for that. And so with that, thank you, audience. The recording will be available. We'll point at it, so that you can send it to your friends and colleagues. And then, anyhow, with that, we hope you have a wonderful day. And again, download the report and send us feedback. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.